will recall today I am having a very special broadcast on, the subject being Somaliland. Somaliland. A week ago, the UK Parliament had a debate debating whether or not to support a recognized independent Somaliland. The debate was heated, very, very much heated. Now, this is not the first one. Around the world, other nations are debating, talking about the US, the European Union, debating whether or not to recognize the independence of Somaliland. Now, this is happening 30 years after Somaliland began to govern itself. Today, I'd like you to stay put, please. I'd like you to stay put. Take a look at this.
Tens of thousands of Somalilanders took to the streets of Bur'o and any other cities of the country to thank and show their support to the British members of Parliament who proposed the recognition of Somaliland in a recent House of Commons. Somaliland is an independent, peaceful and stable nation on the Horn of Africa. Somaliland has been a distinct region from Somalia since the late 1800s. It was a British protectorate until 1960, and that means British and Somaliland have a long historic ties.
Very hot and very dry, that's the British protectorate of Somaliland.
30 years ago, on 18 May 1991, the Republic of Somaliland declared independence, the separation from the collapse in Somalia. And now, today, Somaliland is one of the most stable de facto states in the world. It has a clearly demarcated territory. It has its own flag, its own constitution, military, parliament, currency, nation identity, and its own passport. Recognizing Somaliland will not just be opening up opportunity for Somaliland itself, but also opportunity for British investors and businesses to come to Somaliland. Somaliland has held competitive elections accompanied by peaceful changes of government. And now let me clear you one thing. What separates Israel from self-proclaimed countries is simply the recognition of other countries. There is no ultimate legal authority in international relations that decides what is or is not real country. So if Somaliland fulfills all the requirements of statehood, why not now?
Why not now? Why not now?
Why not now? Those are Somalilanders, ladies and gentlemen, craving for a country of their own. And that craving is what led to this debate at the British Parliament. Take a look.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you ever so much for having the privilege of being able to bring this adjournment debate to the House today. In 1960, Somaliland emerged independent from the British Empire after many years as the British Somaliland Protectorate. And for 5 days it was independent before it took the step to merge with what was then the trust territories of Italian Somaliland, historic Italian Somaliland, to form a union. Both nations entered that union with optimism, with a sense and a view of creating a pan-Somalia, of where all Somalis would be able to come together. And actually the hope was for so many of those in Somaliland that actually this would be a union of equals. Sadly, over the following 30 years, those hopes and those aspirations of what might have been were not fulfilled. And indeed, as the years progressed, the situation got worse with military dictatorships. And instead of there being a tragic situation of people being discriminated against from the north of Somalia in historic British Somaliland, actually what started to emerge was attacks upon civilians. There was mass killings where tens of thousands of Somalilanders were killed. Civilians were killed. It was one of the few conflicts where fighter jets took off from cities in the area in order to bomb the cities that they'd taken off from, indiscriminately, killing thousands of civilians. Nomadic tribes. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
And for securing this very important debate. My constituency has a very large Somaliland population of those from Somaliland whose families suffered in, as he's described, in that conflict. What we've seen is last year Somaliland celebrated 30 years of the Declaration of Independence. And they've built up their own independent government, own currency and democratic elections. They've shown the capability to establish a state. Isn't it time, in his view, that the UK government formally recognise their right to self-determination and recognise their need to be an independent state?
The Honourable Lady raises a very important point, and this is the key point and reason for this debate, to actually discuss about the fact that Somaliland has developed so much. Because in those years of conflict, where so many Somalilanders were not just in the threat of their lives, but so many hundreds of thousands were displaced, both internally within Somaliland, but also externally. That dream and that vision of actually creating their own homeland once again, re-establishing those old territorial borders, burnt bright, and that is what they actually were able to achieve in 1991. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Giving way and draw attention to my interests as one of the vice chairs of the All-Party Group on Somaliland, and been pleased to work with the honourable gentleman on these issues. Would he also pay tribute to my predecessor, Alan Michael, and indeed many members of the Somalilander community in Cardiff and across the UK for exposing those atrocities back at the time, including in this House and elsewhere, and explaining what had gone on to the world, and commending them on what they did at that time.
I'd like to pay tribute to the honourable member's predecessor and, of course, so many people who live within his constituency. And, of course, in his constituency is a very established Somaliland community that's been there far longer than probably either he or myself have been on this earth. And so this country has deep, deep links with Somaliland that goes actually not just back many decades, but goes back a century and more, with many Somalilanders calling Britain very much their home, as well as Somaliland itself. Give way to my honourable friend.
First of all, I'm delighted that my honourable friend from South Africa has secured this important debate. Many of us who've been supporting Somaliland as an independent state very much welcome the fact that he's here. On that very point, he will know, no doubt, that many of Her Majesty's naval ships for 100 or more years have had Lashkars from Somaliland, Stokers and others who have built the first mosques in this country. Would he not agree with me that recognising the Somalilanders here in the UK is about also recognising our own past and our own future together as investors in a new Africa, and demonstrators that independent states that govern themselves well in democracies can really succeed, and we can partner with them?
My honourable friend, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, is absolutely right. By taking the brave step to recognise Somaliland, we're actually not just opening up opportunities for Somaliland itself. We're actually opening up opportunities for British investors, British business to go there and work, very much creating the gateway to the whole of the Horn of Africa. I will give way to my right honourable friend and then my right honourable friend.
I'm very grateful indeed to my right honourable friend who has brought this most important subject to the floor of the House. Can I tell him that I have visited Hargeisa when I was Secretary of State for International Development, and indeed we spent quite a lot of time on exactly the issues he and the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee have just raised. There is an enormous degree of normalcy there. The democratic structures, when they have elections, have held in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. There is proper governance. I've travelled on a bus in Hargeisa that was a result of British investment. And the case he's making about Somaliland becoming an independent state is one which the Foreign Office normally take the view that they don't want to lead it, but they would support it. But is he aware that the African Union is at least passively acquiescent in that view, if not actively supportive?
Well, on both areas that my right honourable friend raises, he's absolutely right. You know, you fly into Hargeisa Airport, it is a safe place in order to be able to visit. You can get a bus to the centre of Hargeisa, as my right honourable friend did. And when I visited, I must confess I didn't get a bus, but I will endeavour to do so next time I do visit. And he's equally right. You know, this is an opportunity for Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office so often want to be led on these issues. There is a moment sometimes for Britain to lead as against to be led. I give way to my right honourable friend, the member for Elmet first.
Thank you, Madam. So I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend. And I think my right honourable friend makes an important point about leading the world, because we have seen throughout the world that where Western nations don't get involved, China does. And when we've had many discussions in this House recently about the influence of China. So does my right honourable friend agree with me, when you look at the development taking place in Somaliland, that actually there are strategic interests in our country and in Western countries to not just see what happens, but to actually take an active leading role and not allow that vacuum to be filled by those who perhaps we have difficulties with?
All right, and while that debate was going on in the UK, ladies and gentlemen, there was an event also taking place in Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, where they went out in their numbers, supporting what was going on in the UK. Take a look.
This is a great day in Somaliland. It's a day when we have the government, the people, the youth, the women, and all Somalilanders in one voice are sending our appreciation and our congratulations to the brave women and men in the British Parliament who voiced their opinion for justice for Somaliland. Britain is known for its strength, for its respect for human rights and for dignity of mankind. Britain was our friend when Somaliland was the British Somaliland Protectorate. Britain is the power who we shared feelings with, strength with, during World War I and during World War II. Somalilanders fought in Burma alongside with the British troops. They fought oppression. They fought injustice. They fought fascism. And our sons and our daughters gave their blood, gave their life to fight for justice. Today, we are grateful that Somaliland has given us its voice to support that of Somaliland. When we have suffered injustice, when we have suffered genocide, when our bodies, the bodies of our victims were filled in mass graves, it is only Great Britain who said this is wrong. Thank you, Great Britain. Thank you for adding your voice to ours. Thank you for fighting alongside us. We recognize your strength. We recognize your value as world leaders. Thank you. Thank you, Great Britain. Long live the Queen. Long live Somaliland. Long live justice.
Long live the Queen, long live Somaliland. Again, that was coming from Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, going out to appreciate the British parliamentarians for debating the subject of their independent recognition. Ladies and gentlemen, I am now being joined by the Honorable Ambassador Tibor Nagy, whom you are all aware of, who served as a U.S. Under-Secretary for African Affairs. I was also to have been joined by the Foreign Secretary of Somaliland. Unfortunately, for technical reasons, he is not here yet. I am hoping he will be able to join me in the course of this show. But I have here with me Ambassador Tibor Nagy. Ambassador, it's a privilege to have you once more, sir. Good afternoon.
And good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me back. And I want to remind your viewers, though, that
watching what transpired in London and the excitement in Somaliland. What is your take on that, sir?
Yeah, first, disclaimer. Remember, I'm no longer speaking on behalf of the United States of America government. I am now back to being a private citizen. I was absolutely delighted with what I saw. I think I have said now publicly that if it was up to me, I would say we should recognize Somaliland today. And I think that the debate, I would even call it a discussion, in London absolutely underlined some of the key points as to why Somaliland deserves recognition as a de jure state, because it already is a de facto state.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yes, if you followed that debate on the floor in the UK, the question of a referendum came up. One of the MPs said, isn't it time for Somaliland to have a referendum to decide its sovereignty? Somalilanders say, however, they've had one. They've had one before. Why does the West want Somaliland to have another referendum, sir?
Well, again, not speaking for the West, the only reason it would make sense to have a referendum would be just to put even more weight on the scale in favor of recognition. Because I think it's clear that there's massive support in Somaliland for statehood, for nationhood. But whenever you have a referendum, I think if you go back and look at the referendum that there was when Eritrea was going to become an independent nation, what the massive numbers were, or the massive numbers in South Sudan. So it's always good to have, one more very heavy piece of evidence that the people supporting Somaliland can say, see, look, such a huge proportion of the population supports this. Not a year ago, not 10 years ago, but today.
So you are saying, therefore, that in spite of the fact that they had a referendum, one is still very important?
It's not critically important, but it certainly would add weight to that. I mean, to get to recognition, you have to have a certain amount of what I would call public diplomacy, which is public relations, to persuade those bodies of the world that are important to be on your side. And, a referendum that was, say, supervised by an internationally recognized, objective organization would certainly add weight to their case.
I know that the last time we discussed this subject, you brought on the factor of the African Union. Now, the West beginning to talk about recognition of Somaliland, in spite of the fact that the African Union remains quiet.
Yeah, remaining quiet is, in my view, a positive step. What would be very negative is if the African Union was making a lot of noise saying, don't even think about this, we oppose it, all of our members oppose it. I mean, again, we have to deal with the real world, not the world that we wish. And the African Union is definitely going to be a factor because they speak for, 52 African countries. So, they will have to be considered, but that's not to say that key countries in the world could say, yes, we recognize the fact that the African Union would not be happy about this, but we believe that there are so many more reasons to go ahead with recognition.
Wouldn't that same argument apply to other conflicts in Africa where the African Union has essentially been silent?
Well, we have to look at every single thing on its own case. As we discussed, I believe, last time, one of the big reasons for the African Union to oppose these types of, processes is because of so many member states have their own problems with regions within those states who might want to seek independence. Immediately comes to mind, of course, Ambazonia in Cameroon, Azawad with Mali, and then the big one, which has already had a horrendous war fought over it, is Eastern Nigeria or Biafra.
Yeah, it's great you talked about Mali. You have Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, where there have been uprisings and change of leadership there, and what the ECOWAS, which is essentially the AU, saying we don't recognize what Mali is doing, and they prefer sanctions from France against Mali. But the Malians and their leaders are standing up and saying we are our own people, we want to make our own choices, we no longer need the French. In fact, they revoked French as an official language. What is your take on what is going on in Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea?
Guinea, yeah. You raise an extremely important point in today's world. The question here is, what are the people of a country supposed to do when they cannot change their government democratically? Either when you have presidents that extend their own offices, to last for as long as they live, or they have elections which are anything but free and fair. And you have such a huge frustration build up amongst the people. And oftentimes, let's be real, oftentimes it's the armed forces in a country that represents the population. So we have this model, not just in the West, but we have this model in the international community that a coup d'etat needs to be opposed, right? That is the model. But then the situations you point out really introduce a very, very interesting geopolitical factor. Is there such a thing as a coup which responds to the popular will? So, when a coup happens, everybody goes to the playbook and it says the first thing you do is you denounce a coup and you urge the soldiers to go back to the barracks and, bring back the former head of state. But we have seen now some select events. For example, when Sudanese President Bashir was overthrown, you saw that no one really called it a coup, did they?
Yeah,
they kind of shook their head and said, yeah, no, that was a popular revolution. So we are now getting to the point, frankly, where you have to look at these events and say, okay, was this a traditional military coup, which is for the interests of some colonel or general, or is this a popular expression? So I think the world will be needing, moving forward, to look at a new model, depending on how many more of these types of events happen.
It is interesting you call it a new model, yet in African leaders seem not to see it as a new model. I mean, I'm referring to ECOWAS here, where they would prefer that the French lord over the Malians than Malians taking care of their own business.
Yeah, you know, you have a certain amount of interest, don't you, when you have a group of presidents who themselves might be vulnerable to this type of a situation. Of course, you know, when they fly into a capital, then the decisions they take, you have to assume will have a certain amount of self-interest. It'll be interesting to see. I think ECOWAS is getting together to see how they're going to respond to the Ouagadougou coup, and we will see what comes out of that. So, you know, I'm coming from the classical view on this, but I have to say that these recent events have not been the old form of you know, the Sergeant Doe taking over the government.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to Somaliland. Again, we see the effort in the British Parliament to push for the recognition of Somaliland as an independent state. Now, of course, everybody knows for 30 years, Somaliland has ruled itself. Security there is great. I mean, I went there and walked the streets of Hargeisa, and I saw money in trucks on the streets of Hargeisa. I was like, there have to be lots and lots of security in this country for people to carry money in trucks along the street to exchange. With the effort that we see in London, what do you think about America, the Germans, the Italians, the Canadians, the French, perhaps doing the same thing to push that initiative to the expected end?
Again, I can only speak about what I have seen in America, and maybe your audience knows, maybe they don't, that there's been a very important development in America as well, because recently we had several staff members from Capitol Hill from Congress who also visited Somaliland. And they came back and they gave quite a positive you know, conclusion and readout of the trip that they made, with some, you know, very positive comments about what they saw and the conditions in Somaliland. And of course, you know, with the positives coming out of Somaliland, at the same time right now, you have the quote unquote election, I wouldn't even call it election, that's going on in southern Somalia. And the contrast could not be more dramatic in the events in those two countries. So the United States, there is, I believe, a new kind of impetus to look at the situation again, especially based on these congressional delegation going there.
So are you saying that an American delegation probably gonna be going back there to again take a look at the situation?
The delegation has been there. They came back. They gave a report, you know, to the members of Congress, and now we'll see where that, you know, moves forward from here. But I feel in the political atmosphere much more positive momentum than I have in a long, long time.
That is wonderful. Now, there is also always the fear of the Chinese getting there before the West does. And it seems, if you listen to the parliamentarians in London, they were essentially saying, hey, they are good trade members and we do not want China. If you don't go, China will go. Isn't this one of the fears that you will hear in every Western capital?
Yeah, you know, every Western capital may deny that, but of course, what China is doing in the world is of tremendous importance to the United States. It's just global politics. So what's called global power competition between China and the United States absolutely is a factor in just about everything internationally these days. So you look at the map of Africa, you especially look at the map of the region. There are, you know, X number of potential ports to be used. China is looking for ports as it expands in its Belt and Road initiative. And of course, the United States is always looking for ports. Right now, Djibouti is there, critically important piece of geostrategic real estate. But, nobody likes to put all of their eggs in one basket. Right now, Djibouti is it. You look up the coast, getting close to that very, very critical area.
Right.
And there you have the port of Berbera. So, of course, that's a consideration.
All right. If I may ask, what do you think of the fact that Somaliland has survived all these years without any foreign support, no debt? The Chinese have not gotten there. I think the only country that is there is insignificant. I think Taiwan, or I think it's Taiwan, if I'm not wrong. That is the only country that I saw that they told me is there, but they have done everything by themselves. In fact, I was told the streets are built with private money. Everything, you go there, you see skyscrapers. You will not believe you are in a country that hasn't gotten independence or international help. What do you make of that fact?
I think it is notable. I think it deserves tremendous credit. I wish other countries in Africa could say the same thing. If you look at all the billions and billions and billions of dollars that have been poured into so many countries, and you look at the results, and they are much, much less than what has happened in Somaliland with not a penny, of foreign assistance. It is commendable. And not only, as you said, is Somaliland holding its own, but right now, and I think the situation is very tragic, that Somaliland is the country in the Horn of Africa which is exporting stability instead of instability. And as you said, they did this all by themselves, and it should be an example to other countries.
When you were under Secretary of State for Africa, what was U.S. policy towards Somaliland, and is it still the same today?
U.S. policy towards Somaliland was basically that there's not going to be formal recognition. We were talking about it. I thought even then the momentum was there because of the positive attributes of Somaliland versus the negatives going on in other places. But, I want to get back to real geopolitics, because in geopolitics you have 24 hours in the day, you have so much oxygen in the room, and when you have major events happening like the northern Ethiopian war, the crisis going on in Sudan, terrorism in the Sahel, Boko Haram and ISIS in Nigeria, Eastern Congo, Al-Shabaab in Mozambique, in a different Al-Shabaab than in Somalia, then those are the issues that take up all the attention. If it was a quiet continent and people actually had time to reflect on these other issues, then you could say, okay, let's move forward. Here's this wonderful story called Somaliland, which is not creating a crisis. It's not taking up any attention. So let's move forward on that. It's just that the geopolitical realities are such that it's the crises that take up all the attention and take up all the time.
So is this still the same situation, the same policy that the U.S. is pursuing today?
Well, again, I can't speak for official U.S. policy, but American foreign policy is the purview of the president, but the U.S. Congress has an awful lot of input into foreign policy. But even beyond the U.S. Congress, U.S. citizens do. Many African diaspora groups in the United States are extremely active politically. You can look at for example, the Ethiopians are very active politically, and they also have a great deal of input. into how our foreign policy is made. So as the case of Somaliland becomes known, especially on Capitol Hill, then you can imagine that there will be some political pressure coming in to take another look at Somaliland with the, to see what more can the United States do to move the relationship forward.
Talking about the rest of Africa, the AU, as far as emerging countries like Somaliland and the rest are concerned, does the U.S. occasionally visit the AU to suggest you can revise your policies?
Not only does the U.S. Visit the AU, but as you know, we are one of the few countries that has a fully accredited ambassador to the African Union who is there all the time. So, she has discussions every single day with officials of the African Union. And obviously, if the question of recognition for Somaliland moves forward, then part of that process absolutely would include engagement and discussions with the African Union.
Wonderful. I would like us to, again, ladies and gentlemen, who were supposed to be having the foreign minister for Somaliland joining this discussion. Apparently, they've not gotten a breakthrough technically to connect to us here. But Ambassador, I will take you to something which you know is very dear to some of us coming from the southern Cameroons, Ambazonia. I know we spoke extensively on it the last time that you were here. The conflict in the Cameroons just keep escalating without any sign that the Cameroon government is ready to call for a ceasefire. What, in your opinion, is the kind of pressure that would enable the Cameroon government to get to the negotiation table? You are aware of the Swiss initiative, which has been hanging for close to 3 years now, and there just seems to be no headway. What, in your opinion, you think that can be done from the international community particularly? Because I want to believe that Southern Cameroonians, Ambazonians, I think they have done the best that they can do to put pressure out internationally to see that Cameroon does something, but it just doesn't seem to be enough, owing to the fact that international pressure isn't also enough on the regime in Yaoundé to do something.
Yeah, I think the last time we discussed this, I also talked about the complexity. I can't speak for the American government, but I understand the American point of view of the complex relationship we have with France, especially regarding Africa, because in some parts of Africa, the French and the Americans are working together very closely. In other parts, we definitely have a difference of opinion, like we do on southern Cameroons or Ambazonia. And, I have gotten incredible grief from some people because I call the Swiss process a process just for the process, that there's not, in my view, there's not going to be any direction towards any kind of concrete results. Now let's get back to the fundamentals. And again, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the Southern Cameroonians do not have one united point of view or even one united goal for an outcome. But the Cameroonian government also is split, because as we all well know, that within the Cameroonian government there are factions that support a negotiated settlement with the Anglophones, but there are also very, very hardcore factions which are telling President Biya every day that you just have to hang in there with the military solution, that that eventually the military will pacify southern Cameroons. So when you have the split on both sides, what are you going to do? I mean, you said that the southern Cameroonians have done everything possible. I hate to disagree with you. But on this regard, I do disagree. Because if there was a united point of view on the part of the Southern Cameroonians with a united group of people that were articulating and voicing that point of view internationally, domestically, publicly, then that whole issue would get a lot more attention. Because frankly, right now, the international community looks at that crisis, they throw up their hand and they basically say, well, you know, last week we heard from this group of Cameroonians and they said X. Next week we're going to hear from this group and they're going to say Y. The government is telling us this. We have people showing us these awful videos and photographs of atrocities. And then the Cameroonian ambassador comes in with his own book showing pictures of teachers who've had their hands cut off because they dared to open their school by the Ambazonians. Whenever there is a complex situation like that going on, it's very, very difficult for the international community to have a response.
But when you look at the mayhem, the destruction, the killings, the razing of villages on the ground, and it is known, human rights groups have written reports indicting the government of Cameroon for most of this mayhem, I mean the killings. Radio France International said recently that many people say, international groups say 3,000 people have been killed, but actually 30,000 have been killed throughout the 5 years. We see the charred villages and towns burned by French Cameroon soldiers. Isn't this enough? Isn't this enough to get the international community look beyond the differences within Ambazonian to say, we've got to stop these killings?
Not only is it enough, but it's way past time. But again, let's talk about the world that it is and not the world we want to be. How long has the crisis been going on in the Eastern Congo? And how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people have been killed there? And what has the world done to address that crisis? You know, and I can just say zero, basically zero. More recently, look at what's going on in Yemen. Look at what's going on in Syria. The way to get international involvement, and I'll tell you again, I hate to use the word public relations or public diplomacy, but it really does amount to having a unified position, having the same set of people presenting it, and that would raise international attention instead of this going off in so many different directions, one after the other.
The last time I had you here, you made mention of the fact that throughout your tenure in D.C. with President Trump, your doors were never knocked at by any Ambazonian group. Right after that interview, there were quite a number of disclaimers from some Ambazonians who said, no, they didn't knock your door, you didn't open the door.
Yeah, here's the deal. Let me clarify. There were a whole bunch of Ambazonians who got in touch with the State Department wanting to speak to the Assistant Secretary. But this gets back to the fundamental problem I just mentioned. There was not one organization which represented the conflict in southern Cameroon. There were a variety. If I had wanted to, I could have met with a different Ambazonian delegation every single week. As I said, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs has 48 countries to deal with. Can you imagine, one delegation after another coming by? So we have the United States State Department has a Africa Bureau which covers all of those countries, and there is a desk that covers Cameroon. It's the Office of Central African Affairs. And I do know that people below me did have quite a few meetings with various factions. But again, I'll go back to the main point. There is not one umbrella or overarching organization which represents the Anglophone point of view. And until that happens, you're going to get the same response from the current administration, because there is not a representative or one group representing the Anglophone population of Cameroon. You know, when we had our revolution back against the British, we had the Continental Congress and we had General George Washington, you know, and the world could look at them and say, these are the people that represent the American colonies who are trying to gain their independence from England. It was not, you know, a different group of Americans every week showing up in Paris or the Netherlands or Madrid or places like that. There has to be unity. There has to be a unified point of view, but there also has to be a unified group of people.
Ambassador, you know that in every struggle like this one we are talking about, even in the American struggle, you will recognize the frontliners, those you can consider leaders. The Southern Cameroon struggle, they have the interim government. In your position, when people come knocking, don't you try to find out who are these? What groups do they represent? And is there a main group on the ground that we can work with? I'm saying this because you had particular interest, concerns with what is going on in the Southern Cameroons. And I'm thinking that in your position, you will say, let's identify the main group that is leading this so we can deal with them. Didn't it occur to you to think this way?
Of course it did. It occurred to me the first week. The first call I had when I think second or third day on the job with my counterpart in Paris, I said, the issue I really, really want to discuss is Cameroon. So of course I had that same thought, and I talked to my people who follow Cameroon closely, and you know, the answer always was that, oh, there's, you know, different groups representing different points of view. They come by regularly. There is a process here. There is a process there. So, yeah, I of course I asked, but the answer was always the same: is that there's fragmentation in the Anglophone movement, just as there's division in the government.
What do you make of the divisions in the government of Cameroon? Would you attribute that to their inability to get to the dialogue table?
No, I would attribute that to just different advisors to President Biya holding very, very different points of view. As I said, and I don't want to get into names, but there are obviously some people who are open to negotiations and dialogue, but at the same time there are other people who very, very much say, no problem, eventually the military will win this. You know that I have gotten tremendous grief for saying openly that I see no military solution.
Right.
I have studied a number of wars of independence, and they all tend to end up the same way. You can have a very, very powerful opponent like the Viet Cong did with the United States of America against them, and you know, at the end of the day, they won. So there's not going to be a military solution, but you know, guess who suffers the most? It's the poor, innocent people of southern Cameroons, where you have, or are we going to have generations of young people who are not going to go to school, who won't know how to read and write, you know, who really are going to not be second-class citizens in their own country, but they'll be third or fourth-class citizens. I mean, I am just as frustrated as you are on this thing, and I really wish the southern Cameroonians would get their act together.
Ambassador, when you speak to the inner circle in La République du Cameroun, and I believe you do, you speak to some of people deep in this inner circle, people taking some of these decisions. What do you get to be their honest feeling about the continuation of the conflict?
Well, number one, I don't speak to any inner circle these days because I'm no longer in my position.
At your doors too.
Yeah. No, they don't
at
come
least
knocking.
When you were there in the office.
Yeah, when I was in the office, and I was just as frank and honest with them as I am with you, and speaking openly, saying that that the point of view of the United States is there is no military solution. End of story. That the sooner this could be resolved, the more favorably it can be resolved, because obviously the Cameroonian government under no circumstances would like to see an independent Ambazonia.
Now we know for sure that the Cameroon government has tried again and again to push the international community, the US in particular, to labeling the Ambazonian restoration fighters and the whole bunch of Ambazonians fighting for independence as terrorists.
Yeah, we run into that situation all the time. I as you know, I spent 22 years in Africa representing the United States of America, and time after time, the head of state would call me into the office and give me a really bad time because the United States of America would not label, this group or that group as a international terrorist organization. I remember one of the worst times I had was with Prime Minister Meles in Ethiopia, who was tremendously frustrated by an Oromo group. And the thing is, we have certain criteria for a group to meet to be labeled as an international terrorist organization. And clearly the lawyers will look at it and say this group meets the definition, this other group doesn't meet the definition. Now, I'll tell you one other thing, though. I used to also get tremendous complaints from many ambassadors concerning the diasporas, saying that, you have these, I'm not going to say which nationalities, living in your country and they're providing money to buy weapons or this, that, or the other. And honestly, I tell them, okay, if some people are committing crimes under the laws of the United States of America, then we will pursue that, because we do have laws on what kind of support, expatriates or diasporas can give to certain organizations. But there's the law and there's the law, and that's how it goes.
What would it take the U.S. government to classify any organization fighting for independence a terrorist organization?
Yeah, look at the definition, because one person's independence movement is another person's terrorist organization. We went through this, if you remember, during the Soviet Union times, where the Soviet side would have their their quote unquote freedom fighters, and the United States would of course call them terrorists. And then we had our freedom fighters, and the Soviet Union called them terrorists. So, there's no longer a Soviet-American kind of, global competition. But it's very important to note that, yes, you look at the law and you see what the criteria are and see, does this organization meet that or not?
How would you grade the Ambazonia Restoration Forces in being able to contain French Cameroon forces in this 5 years battle?
I cannot answer that. I that's one thing I don't do. I don't follow the battles and the fighting on the ground. Unfortunately, what I follow is the results, the individual tragedies. Those are the things that in the State Department was really breaking our hearts. Because, again, underline, I do not speak for the United States of America government anymore. Right. But as you well know, the U.S. government policy, at least during our administration, was that we were in support of a unified Cameroon. Now, I've gotten a lot of grief when I used to say that when I testified before Congress. But let's be truthful, policies do change. But to change policies, you need a lot of political pressure. We were talking about Somaliland before.
Yeah.
And it would be the same kind of a thing here, is that the diaspora needs to be united. They need to speak with one voice. And they need to have the same people that show up time after time so that, people start associating the positions with them. It's always nice to have very accomplished and, well-spoken people who can present a point of view.
But Ambassador, that is quite difficult because you really, it would be very unique to find that in any movement because it is in the nature of man to think that you are not doing it the right way. We can do it better. Let's do our own thing. You know that. I really think that.
Yeah. Let me just say.
Yes, go on, please.
Yeah, I would just say a couple of names. Jonas Savimbi.
Yes.
John Garang.
Yes.
Melis Zenawi. Isaias Afewerk. Museveni. Paul Kagame. During their times when they were engaged and on the ground, they were all seen by the international community as quite heroic figures. A lot of those people, of course, since that time have changed. We can look at certain of those presidents who've been in. I think President Museveni has been there, almost as long as President Biya?
Oh, yeah. I think he's second to President Biya.
So, okay, but if you recall, even President Clinton, back in his time, named the young leaders of Africa. And at the time, if you remember the young leaders of Africa, he named it was Paul Kagame, Museveni, Melis, and Isaias. Those people embodied the movements that they represented. How different South Sudan would be today if John Garang had stayed alive. Of course, Jonas Savimbi lost, but he was seen as quite a heroic, charismatic figure.
No,
so there are people who embody him.
All of these leaders you mentioned, they were based in the territory. Whether Jonas Savimbi, Garang, Museveni. Museveni came in from, the Congo, and then took over power. All of them were based in the territory. We are talking about Ambazonia struggle that is prosecuted from the diaspora. We don't have a single leader on the ground because we know you put a leader on the ground, you will be killed the next day.
Yeah, in the American Revolution, we had Benjamin Franklin, who never spent a day fighting anywhere, but he was quite well known around Europe, and one of the leading figures in Paris at the time. And even the leaders I mentioned, they made their share of trips to various capitals, to present what they were trying to do.
Are you by any means suggesting that maybe Southern Cameroonians, if they had a leader on the ground who is the main person that the world can point to, putting aside the diaspora, maybe a little bit workable idea?
Okay, I'm not into into recommending strategy like that. All I'm saying is if there were people who were the recognized face of the issues that the Southern Cameroonians are trying to promote, speaking with one voice, then that would be much louder within the cacophony of all of the international events that are going on right now.
Ambassador, last time you mentioned being a good friend to Chairman John Fru Indi and actually traveling up to Bamenda to spend some time with him and have some meetings there. What do you make of the fact that after 30 years, Frundi never went close to becoming president of Cameroon, in spite of the population he was pulling behind him in those days?
Remember last time I said read the National Democratic Institute report on that very famous election?
Yes.
So, you know, who can say with certainty how some of those elections turned out? All I know is, you know, I mean, this is now so many years later, but back then he was the face of the opposition. And he was tremendously popular. And, you know, read the election report to see, you know, how that was conducted.
But then many other elections were conducted after that. He never won any.
Yeah, well, who knows what he won?
You had a visit in your office in D.C. Last year from Maurice Kamto, who was supposed to be the winner of the last presidential election conducted there. He presented himself as taking over, the next man, the man going to take over from Paul Biya. That too didn't happen. What do you make of this?
Well, what I make of it is that some elections are much better than any elections. Some elections produce a winner who got the most votes. Some elections produce winners who did not get the most votes. I'm not going to specify which election is which. It's just that realistically, very few elections are absolutely perfect. And we know that there is tremendous power in the incumbency. Some incumbents, put their thumb on the scale. Other incumbents, in addition to putting the thumb on the scale, step on the scale with all of their body weight. So hopefully the time will come when, elections are much, much more representative of results. Earlier, we were talking about Somaliland's elections. And, again, you're talking about a country that has conducted, some of the most honest elections anywhere.
Right. I wish we had the foreign minister here. It really puts me at a little difficult position here, but unfortunately we couldn't get him for technical reasons. But Ambassador, if you can, please, for the next few minutes remaining, I know many Southern Cameroonians, Ambazonians would love to ask you a question. Permit me to open the phone line for maybe 2 or 3, please.
You're going to make my life really difficult here.
Well, so please let me open the phone lines here, ladies and gentlemen. Before you call, make sure that you shut down the volume of your television set to avoid an echo. So please, the phone number is there. Go ahead, call, have a short, precise question to the ambassador. Okay, I think we got the first caller here. Let's see. Hello.
Hello, Sexy Chris.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. You're calling from Germany, I guess, right?
You're right.
Okay, quickly, 50 seconds. What is your question, please?
Yeah, I have this question to ask Ambassador Tibor Nagy. If he was a leader in this Ambazonian revolution, that is, he is an Ambazonian and a leader of one of the factions, what will he be doing right now considering the state of the revolution? Thank you.
Ambassador, you got the question. If you were a leader of one of the factions of the Ambazonian group, what would you be doing right now?
Well, now, I'm not a leader of any of the factions. I'm not an Ambazonian. I'm a Hungarian American. But in that kind of a struggle, what I would always try to be doing is to unify a movement as much as possible, and to get many of the people as possible behind that unified movement, so it's not fragmented, and there's not so many different factions about. Because just saying that one of the factions, that indicates the fragmentation which exists.
All right, let's get to the next caller here. Hello.
Hello, Secretary Chris.
Yes, sir. Where are you calling from, please?
I'm calling from Porto.
Porto, what country is that?
Porto, that's Portugal.
Portugal, okay. What is your question, sir? Briefly.
My question to the ambassador is that, there is a law which states that people have the right to self-determination, and the Southern Cameroons, they are a country that was recognized by the United Nations. So I want to ask him if in any way in their meetings they have been talking about Southern Cameroons as a country, and two, are they aware that they are not separatists? They are people that are struggling to restore their statehood, because they are not terrorists. They were first with Nigeria before coming to join Cameroon, as history tells us. So is that one? Let's forget about the divisions of the frontline leaders. Is that one not a point for the international community to give those people their freedom as a people that have existed and is well recognized in the United Nations? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ambassador, please. I don't know where you got the
again,
position.
my friend, we're going to get back to the same point, that we have to deal with the world as it is, not the world that is ideal or we want to have. And I'll make the statement again, which I know upsets people, is that geopolitical realities trump legalities. So in my own discussions, I cannot remember ever having discussions where somebody at a high level said, "Oh, but let's look at the legal history here." That's the case we need to make. The fact is that again, I go back to my administration, is that the point of view of the administration was the unity of Cameroon. But then I'll go again, Chris, and say that policies change. Policies always change based on realities, and that's the thing that people have to look at.
Awesome, thank you. Let me get to this other caller here. Hello.
Hello, good evening, Secretary Chris.
Good evening, ma'am. Where are you calling from, please?
I'm calling from La Republique.
Okay, La Republique. Okay, and what is your question, ma'am?
I want to thank our Ambassador Tibor for coming on the program. And my question goes to him. My question is this. I want to ask Mr. Ambassador that, is he aware that some of the groups that he's talking of are being sponsored by La Republique?
That's a really good question, yes?
Yeah. For example, the group of Cho Ayaba, the group of Apanga is being sponsored by La Republique. How can unity hold when some of the groups are being sponsored by La Republique? And he of all who has been in La Republique, knowing well of the mafia of La Republique, how is he hoping that unity can hold unity in one purpose, as he's talking of, after which some of the groups are being sponsored by La Republique seriously for the war not to end? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting question, Mr. Ambassador, which escaped my mind, talking about unity. You are very much conversant of how leaders in Africa operate, they divide to rule or to conquer. So that when it comes to struggles like the one for Ambazonia, you have these different factions that are paid by the government to infiltrate the mainstream leadership to create the atmosphere that you call divisions. Are you aware? I mean, you should be aware of this, isn't it?
Yeah, I am very aware of it because I remember covering a lot of elections where you had 45 parties, contesting the elections, but out of the 45 parties, 43 were paid off by the government.
Right.
This is not unique to Cameroon. It's not unique to Africa. This has been a fundamental factor in such movements since history began. Even in the American Revolution, quite a large percentage of the population were actually Tories who were, in support of the British, and the British supported those groups, and there was quite a lot of money that changed hands, within these organizations. That's something that every single movement has to deal with, and when there is enough of a momentum and enough of a weight within a population to come down in support of one particular view, then those other groups all of a sudden become a lot less powerful. They kind of hide and go away. That's just the nature of movements.
So, Ambassador, I guess the question is, in your position as a diplomat representing a country that is seeking solutions to these problems, what do you do knowing that there are factions that are created by the regime? Because you have been talking, you've been so much vocal about being united here, but these groups cannot come together. They cannot agree to work with others because they have a mission.
Yeah, that's where of course, the international media and the various embassies are very, very useful in reporting the true facts on the ground, so that all of that is publicized and it is known. And when you shine a light in the darkness on some of these groups, then they immediately disappear, go away. They're not funded anymore. As I said, that's a fact of life. That happens in other movements. Look at the Russian Revolution. Look at what was happening in Vietnam, and there were groups set up especially to try to co-opt the Viet Cong. It's a fact of world history.
All right, I will take the last question, Mr. Ambassador. Hello.
Hello. Yes, Mr. Ambassador, thank you once more for coming.
Where are you calling from, sir?
This is Ephraim calling from San Antonio.
All right.
And, my question is to the Ambassador, and this question is similar to one asked you minutes ago by a sister in La République du Cameroun. Mr. Ambassador, are you aware that these human rights atrocities that the minister from La République has shown up in your office and the display, some of these people's arms have been amputated by boys that are referred to as Atanganji boys in Ambazonia? They are well known. We call them generally Atanganji boys. So Atanganji sets up these groups and they go out and commit these atrocities and they call themselves restoration fighters. They are not. It is well known to the people of Ambazonia that these groups exist here and there, and they are set up by Minister Tanganji just to give a bad face to the honest fight being put up by our restoration forces trying to free our land. So they just want to attribute some of these atrocities to our people, and so they send out these groups, and they cause this mayhem, cutting hands and kidnapping people. These are Tanganji boys. If you're not very aware of this, please take another look. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Chris. That always came into play. Is the distortion, the deception, an awful thing happens, and immediately you have so many different reports, like the recent assassination of the good senator. So many different quote-unquote credible stories
Henry
came out as to who did it. It is absolutely disgusting and despicable because, I've said before, at the end of the day, the poor guy that has his hands chopped off, or the poor woman who's raped, or the kids that are killed, or that they're made to, the school children who are made to take their clothes off. Movements should take responsibility that if they control a territory, then they need to assure that there be peace and tranquility. I mean, at the end of the day, you and I know that fundamentally it is a government's responsibility to provide for the peace. But when there is conflict going on, then it falls to whoever controls the territory that they have to do it. One of the things, and unfortunately, in some of these extremist movements, the population actually goes on the side of what we call the terrorists, because they promote and provide real justice, whereas the government in place was not providing it. The tragedies happen, and different people come in with different books. I had books of awful pictures from both sides, and it turns out that the photos weren't even from the places that they were claiming that they were from, or they happened in a totally different area. As long as all of the sides are trying to use this for public relations, there's going to be a horrible deception. That is a huge tragedy.
In these situations, you have, like in Yaoundé, your ambassador, your intelligence officials who are giving you the reality of who is doing what on the ground. I remember the case of the former ambassador, Henry, Ballerine. At a point in time, he was very agitative, and he didn't hide it with the government of Cameroon, to say the government of Cameroon was killing innocent people.
Yep.
I mean, when these reports come to your office or in the State Department office responsible, don't they?
Oh, yes, and you should have. You shouldn't hear some of the discussions I had with Cameroonian officials over those exact same things, because our embassy was doing a extremely good job of being able to report on these events. But even when I was in Yaoundé as a deputy ambassador to Ambassador Cook, I remember that we went through a very turbulent period, and terrible things happened. And we would get the report from the government side saying, this happened. That's when I would go to Bamenda and talk to the people involved and find out that the story was totally different. But each of these things, especially when they happen in areas which are inaccessible, and a diplomat would actually risk their own life going in and trying to investigate it. So you often don't get the facts. All you do is get second or third-hand reports. And you and I both know that all sides will exaggerate the incidents. This is not just on one side. I have seen this also firsthand in many countries, that the opposition would say that there was a march in such and such a city, and that there were 200 demonstrators killed. And then I would go there and look at the facts and find out that yes, 3 demonstrators were actually killed, but the facts were a lot different than when they were presented. So people die, people suffer horribly. And there are always contradictory reports on this. That's why control and as peaceful methods as possible is so essential.
Well, unfortunately, when it is war, it cannot be peaceful, Mr. Ambassador.
For the innocent.
For the
innocent.
All right, let's hope so.
No, absolutely.
Let's hope so. It is war. It is war. Thank you so much for being my guest again. I look forward to talking with you again, sir. Thank you. You have a good
Chris,
night.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. The distinguished minister from Somaliland didn't show up, but I think I presented his case pretty well.
Well, you did your best. I wish he was here to confirm that. Thank you very much for showing up, sir. I appreciate it.
Take care. God bless you. God bless Cameroon.
All right, thank you. You too. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Ambassador Tibor Nagy joining me from Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. We're looking forward to having him back when need be. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now open the phone lines for those of you who still have questions to ask. So I will open the phone lines and let you come in with your questions. All right, let me get to ground zero first. Hello.
Chris.
Hello.
Yeah, hello, Secretary Chris.
Hello, sir. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from ground zero,